Buongiorno a tutti voi agenti e ben ritrovati su questa piattaforma di Visitusa per le nostre sessioni, per i nostri incontri con il National Park Service. Questa è la nostra terza puntata, siamo stati molto contenti anche dei feedback ricevuti dalle prime due sessioni. Stiamo ovviamente lavorando per migliorare sempre di più questi incontri così quasi informali con i ranger statunitensi. Oggi avremo il piacere di esplorare una zona che forse è un po' meno conosciuta, diciamo, per quello che riguarda i parchi nazionali degli Stati Uniti. Andremo nel Midwestern United States e nell'area dei Grandi Laghi. Avremo modo appunto di scoprire qualche parco nazionale che non tutti magari conoscono in profondità molto bene. Come al solito abbiamo il nostro delegato, il nostro presentatore Donald Ledbetter, che farà il leader di questa presentazione, che ci ha tenuto compagnia anche nelle prime due presentazioni. Avremo due Rangers, ovviamente, avremo Byron e Stacy che avranno appunto la possibilità di spiegarci anche nel dettaglio questi parchi che andremo a presentare. So thanks a lot to everybody. Thanks for joining. I've been making already the presentation, so I think that Donald, already everybody knows you. But again, thanks a lot for joining. And I think you can go ahead with the start of the presentation and giving the microphone to Byron and Stacy whenever you feel comfortable to do. Thanks a lot, Donald. You can go.
Thank you very much, Nicolo. Buongiorno tutti, everybody. Hello. Thank you so much for attending this third presentation about national parks in the United States. We're very excited to speak with you again and talk about the Midwestern and Great Lakes part of the United States. I will be speaking today with my colleagues Byron Forbes and Stacy Humphreys have joined for this presentation. It's been so great to be recruiting my colleagues across the National Park Service to help with these presentations. So it's so great to have them with us today. And they'll be back with us here in a minute after I give some introductory remarks about the National Park System. First, to everybody out there, I hope to meet some of you later this year if you attend the IPW Travel Trade Show in the United States. I wanted to mention IPW because this week we had a meeting with the U.S. Travel Association about the plans for IPW and that they are moving forward with planning for the IPW show in September. And the National Park Service, we do attend that trade show. So I just wanted to mention that we are crossing our fingers and hoping that IPW will take place in September. And if you do attend, I really hope to get the chance to meet you there at that show taking place in Las Vegas this year. Okay, the national parks. This is our third presentation about national parks across the United States. And here at the beginning, I want to say just a couple of things about the national park system, big picture, the entirety of the system. So there's a little repetition if you have attended the previous webinars. So I will be brief with these general information points. And then we want to talk about national parks in the Midwest and the Great Lakes region of the United States. So the national park system, you're all familiar with it, of course, at this point that we are promoting the amazing national parks of the United States. But something I want to emphasize is just how large the system is. All of the green on this map, 85 million acres across the United States, is part of the national park system. There are 423 units in the national park system. So it's much more than just national parks, which are the most famous designation, but we have national monuments and national historic sites and national battlefields, national recreation areas, national lake shores, national parks and preserves. So it's a very large system that stretches across the entire country with national park units in every state. 5 territories, and the District of Columbia. So no matter where you are traveling in the United States, there will be a unit of the national park system that you can incorporate into your travels, into your road trip. I highly recommend, no matter where you are planning trips for your clients, for your customers, no matter where they're going, take a look at the entirety of the national park system and see if there are opportunities to weave in a visit to some parks, because they will be the highlights of a trip to the United States, because it's guaranteed when you visit the national park system, you are connecting with very unique and authentic and inspiring stories about the history of the United States, the ecosystems and nature and heritage, and the full complexity of this country. Because in the national park system, there is so much to do. And that's what's so exciting about visiting the national parks. There are so many activities for travelers, for families, wildlife viewing, photography, sightseeing, a lot of outdoor recreation opportunities, hiking and camping, kayaking, rafting, exploring history, heritage, and culture across the national park system. For example, numerous indigenous sites, archaeological sites protected across the country from the original inhabitants of North America and of this land. Key moments in American history, the American Revolution, the founding of the country, sites in Philadelphia and Boston and New York City, for example. Important sites about the presidents of the United States, boyhood homes for various presidents where they grew up, sites where inventions were made, like the flight, the first man-powered flight, the Wright brothers, both their workshops in Ohio and where the first flight took place in North Carolina, Thomas Edison's workshop in North Carolina. So an incredible variety of activities, things to do, things to learn about, things to experience, and all really connecting you to the history, heritage, nature, culture of the United States across the width and breadth of this very large system. Just a couple of points to make about some big picture aspects of visiting national parks. I want to talk about fees just for a second, important practical information to know for your customers, for your clients. Most national park sites are free. So of the 423 national park units, 315 of them are free and do not charge anything. So that is a great part of visiting national parks, is that it is a low cost activity while visiting the United States. Many of them are open spaces, like in the bottom right, that's the National Mall in Washington, DC. There's no entry point, you know, people enter and exit the National Mall and the monuments there. There's obviously no fee. Some parks do charge entrance fees. It may look like the photo in the top left, where you're entering the park through an entrance station. You'll meet with a ranger, pay an entry fee that may range from $20 to $35 per vehicle, typically for 1 week of access. You'll get a map of the park, a brochure to guide you into your park experience. We do have an annual pass. It is $80 and it provides unlimited access to national parks and other public lands as well. The pass, you can order it online ahead of time, but I recommend, it's complicated shipping that internationally. I recommend when you arrive at a park that has an entrance fee, you can buy the pass right there. Any park where you arrive and there's an entrance fee, you can pay to purchase the annual pass for $80, which will give you admission unlimited to the national parks of the United States and other lands as well. So if your clients or customers are visiting multiple parks, recommend they buy the pass at the first park they visit that pays a fee, that has a fee, an entrance fee. One tip we always recommend is visiting the visitor center at a national park. The staff that work in the visitor centers, national park staff, often volunteers, these folks are incredibly knowledgeable about what is taking place in a park that day. What are the special activities? Maybe what are some wildlife activities or sightings that have been taking place recently? what special programs are going on, special presentations or activities or events or demonstrations. They can really help orient you to your park visit. They may have practical information. Maybe some parts of a park are closed, or there's some situation or scenario going on that's good to know. Many parks are very large and wild places, so it can be good to know what's going on in a park. You want to visit the visitor center. But also, ahead of time, it's so important to plan your national park visit. I think national parks are a little different than things like a cruise or an all-inclusive resort or a theme park, things like that, where it's kind of easy, you're kind of guided along your experience a little bit. National parks are best experienced with a little bit of planning and leaning into thinking about your trip and your park experience. You want to do a little research to know about the park, where you want to see, what parts of the park you want to see, what activities you might want to do. That way you can get there and kind of get going and experience the park, the whole time that you're there, not have to do, learn everything when you arrive. You have a sense of what the park offers and what you want to experience, and you can kind of get right to it. So we have great planning resources at nps.gov. We have a new app for the entire national park system that just launched, and I highly recommend following the social media feeds of our parks. Great sources of information about what's going on in a park. Very briefly here, we have a lot of planning information at the park websites, and depending on the type of park your customers or clients are visiting, they may be interested in various visitor services. Many of our parks do have lodging or food and beverage and retail, camping, of course. They may have different guided tour opportunities from private companies that do guided activities in a park, guided hiking or guided photography classes or guided kayaking or even guided climbing and outdoor activities like that. Some parks you can only reach via a ferry. There are a few of those in the system and things like that. So we have visitor services information online at nps.gov under things to do, places to go, directions and transportation. Lots of great information to guide you to planning park experiences for your customers and for your clients. Finally, my last message to you is that we always need help in delivering messages about behaving responsibly in parks, leaving no trace, not doing damage to park resources, not getting too close to the animals, to the fragile ecosystems and geology of parks, not leaving graffiti or trash behind, of course. So this kind of behavior you see on the slides, this is not good behavior for park visitors. So when you're talking with your customers and clients about visiting national parks, find opportunities to talk to them about the principles of leave no trace, about being aware of your surroundings, about maintaining your distance from animals, about helping keep our parks clean and in great shape, leave only footprints and take only photographs. So we always love having help with delivering those messages. Okay, now we're going to talk specifically about parks of the Midwestern United States and Great Lakes region. This is a large area of the United States that I think for many visitors is maybe somewhere they visit on their third or their fourth visit to the United States. And I love this part of the United States. Great big landscapes. It's the perfect part of the country for a road trip, for exploring and just hitting the interstate or the highway, preferably, and just visiting these great landscapes and vistas of the middle of the United States. And there are some amazing stories, amazing history and heritage, and ecosystems as well in this part of the United States. So to highlight some of the national parks in the Midwest and in the Great Lakes region, first up is my colleague Bryony. I'm going to pass over to her for her section.
All right, thank you, Donnie, and thank you all for allowing me to be here today. I'm excited to share some of these parks with you. My name is Byrony Forbes. I am the volunteer manager at Everglades National Park. So I am in South Florida. And basically I oversee the volunteer program for the park where, so if groups want to come and do service projects for the park, I help set them up with the projects, or if park staff need volunteers to help them with things, I'll help recruit volunteers. So that's essentially what I do here. But I am excited to talk to you about the Midwest and the Great Lakes. I'm actually from the Midwest, so some of these parks are places I've been to, so I'm excited to tell you about them. The first one I'm going to start off with is going to be Voyageurs National Park. So this park was set aside because it preserves a trade route that French Canadians did back in the 1617, 1800s. So they traded beaver pelts up and down this water corridor with various peoples there. And what it ended up doing is it opened up the kind of the northwest of the United States for trade and for living purposes. So this park was set aside to commemorate that trade route. It is in the state of Minnesota, so it is far north. So if you see up there, it's in on the border with Canada. So it's one of our northern states. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see it's actually at the north of that state. So it does border Canada. It is pretty high up there. The nearest international airport is going to be Minneapolis, St. Paul International Airport. That is about a 5-hour drive from the park. So if you come in and you stop there, it's going to take you about 5 hours to get there. There is a smaller airport closer to the park, which is only about a 40-minute drive. So if you get a ticket from Minneapolis to International Falls Airport, then it's only a 40-minute drive. Both those airports will have rental cars for people, so if they want to get a car while they're there, they can take that and drive to the park that way. So some information about this one. It is free. There is no charge for it. The grounds are open every day, all year round, so it's always accessible. There are 11 hikes and overlooks that you can get to by car. One thing about this park is it's a former trade route and the trade route was done by waterways. So the traders used canoes, kayaks to get through the waterway. So a lot of this park is going to be water-based, but some of the hikes are accessible by car. You can drive up to them. A lot of them are shorter, but there are some longer ones. Most of them are going to be flat, but their distance will just vary just depending on the hike. And then there's also 6 trails that are accessible just by water, just by taking a canoe or a kayak or a boat. There is camping. The camping spots are only accessible via the water though. So to get to a campsite in this park, you have to take a boat to get to them. They do have boat rentals there. So you can rent canoes, kayaks, houseboats. You can even rent if you have previous motorboating experience. So there are boat rentals available to get around the park if you need to. There's ranger programs. There is actually lodging in the park. This is actually also accessible by water. However, the hotel has a water ferry that they'll pick you up and take you back and forth on. So if people want to stay in the park, they can stay in this hotel and there will be transportation back and forth to it. If they don't want to stay in the park, there's a major highway, Highway 53, which kind of goes along through the park or goes along the boundaries of the park, and there's going to be lodging all along there in the towns along the way. Here's a map of the park. It's a little hard to see, but it's kind of spread out. So there are 3 main visitor centers, and then there's a ranger station, which is what is in the far right-hand bottom corner. That's a ranger station. So it's not going to be so much exhibits, but there will be some information. The other 3 up kind of on the top there are visitor centers people can go to. The park spans quite a little bit of a distance. It's about 166 kilometers from the ranger station down at the bottom there to the visitor center up on top. So that's about a distance of 166 kilometers to go through. But you can, there's various places to stop and get out and go to the overlooks or go hiking too, even if you don't want to get on a boat into the water. Now, why go to this park? One thing that's neat about this is that there's 4 seasons of activity. So no matter what season you go to, there's a lot to do there. Some parks don't have as much to do when the weather turns cold or winter. This park has something for everybody all times of the year. So for summer, spring area, the highs are going to be about 24 Celsius. It gets down to about 4 Celsius, May through September. But during that time, you can do hiking, camping. There's a lot of birds. There's a lot of owls. There's geese, bald eagles, different birds you can watch. There's fishing. There's all kinds of fishing up in the water areas there. Again, you can rent boats there. And then there are guided ranger programs June through September. Most of those are free. You can book those in advance. If you go to the park's website, it'll take you to where you need to go, and you can reserve one of these ranger programs. Most of these ranger programs are going to be like canoe or kayak tours through the park. And in winter, there's still things to do. It does get a little colder. High is going to be about 11 Celsius. Low is going to be about -22 Celsius. But they do have cross-country skiing and snowshoeing, and you can get skis and snowshoes from some of the visitor centers for free. So you don't have to worry about renting them or getting them. But if you call ahead of time, you can usually get skis or snowshoes from the park itself. There are ice roads, and an ice road is essentially all these waterways in the park that originally, you had to take boats through. They freeze over. The park plows them, and you can actually drive a car down these frozen waterways if you are brave enough to do that. I don't know if I would do that, but if you are brave enough to, you can drive through the park during the winter on the frozen water. So that is an option. Ice fishing is also available, snowmobiling and sledding. So there is a lot to do even in the winter if you're willing to brave the cold. There's also a lot of animals in the park. It has quite a variety. This is just a few of them. This isn't even all of them, but there are bears, bobcats, snapping turtles, wolves. You might hear wolves howling if you camp at night. Otters, porcupines, moose, deer, there's beaver, there's all kinds of things out there to see and hear if you spend enough time in the nature. So for those people who like animals, it's a great place. Another thing, I didn't include this in the slides, but if you like history or historical buildings, there's a lot of historic sites within the park also. There's a historic fish camp. There's a historic resort and some historic cabins that visitors can also go and look at too. So if people are interested in kind of the old architecture, old history, there are some places. There's also a rock sculpture garden too to visit as well. Also in the park is going to be some beautiful sunsets. You're right along the water right there. You're pretty far up north, so you're going to see some beautiful sunsets. And another thing that you could potentially see up there is going to be the Northern Lights. It's far enough north that the Northern Lights do come out. So visitors to that park will hopefully get a chance to see that depending on the conditions. There's also great night sky viewing. There's a lot of stars. It's going to be dark out there. So for people who like astronomy or like to view the stars, then they're able to go out there and see the stars. And for more information, the park's website is down there at the bottom. It's www.nps.gov/voya. So that's where people can go to get kind of all the details and find out the opening hours of visitor centers and how to rent activities and reserve programs. That should all be on that website right there. So next we're going to go a little bit west and we're going to go to Theodore Roosevelt National Park. So this park was set aside for former President Theodore Roosevelt. He was a big advocate of the national park system, and so they wanted a place to commemorate him. He actually used to have a ranch in this area, and this was one of his favorite places to go. So they created this park up in North Dakota. So this is also another northern state which borders Canada. So it's also going to be higher up north. If we go to the next slide, it's going to be kind of on the corner, kind of central of North Dakota. Minneapolis-St. Paul is still the closest international airport. It's about an 8-hour drive. There is a regional airport, Dickinson Theodore Roosevelt Regional Airport, which is a 40-minute drive, and that will also have rental cars too. So if people want to take an extra flight in, they can do that. So it's pretty easily accessible. Basic information, it is $30 per car, and that pass is good for 7 days to get you in. There are 3 visitor centers to stop at. Grounds, just like the other park, are open every day, all year round. There is going to be a north unit, a south unit, and then there's an Elkhorn Ranch unit, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then there are also 2 campgrounds within the park. There is no hotels or cabins or anything. There are going to be 19 hiking trails. Some of them are easy and short. Some of them are going to be a little bit longer and more hilly. You can actually go to the location of Roosevelt's old cabin. The cabin itself isn't there, but some of the ruins of the cabin are there, but you can actually go visit that. There is a lot of lodging available in the towns that are kind of just right outside the park. They're usually open with lodging in them. So this is kind of a map of it. So you see there's the 2 separate units, south unit, north unit. It's about an hour and 15-minute drive between the 2. So to get in between the 2 is about an hour and 15 minutes. Off on the left-hand side here is where the Elkhorn Ranch unit is. It's about a 40-minute drive. 45-minute drive from each of the units. That unit is a little bit harder to access if there's a lot of rain or it's been wet, melting snow. It's really hard to get to. They don't really recommend it. If it's too wet, they recommend either 4-wheel drive or a vehicle with high clearance. But if it's dry and the weather's okay, you might be able to get there on a regular car, but you'd want to check with the rangers first just to find out what the road conditions are. It's not a paved road, it is a dirt road. So if you do tend to go off into it, it's a beautiful scenic drive to get there, but just check with the rangers before anyone ventures out that way. So why go? So Secret Theodore Roosevelt is actually one of my favorite parks. I have been to Yellowstone and I've been to Glacier, and I say I like Theodore Roosevelt even better. So don't tell Yellowstone that, but it's a beautiful park. The scenery is beautiful, and there's a lot of solitude. So it's not a very visited park. People go to it, but not a lot of people know about it or take the time to go see it. And anyone I've ever met who's ever been there, including myself, is like, wow, this park is just amazing. It's quiet. You get some beautiful vistas. It's a really, really neat park. And if anyone's up in that area of the country, I highly recommend you stop there to see that. It's definitely worth going to. Spring, summer, and fall. So May through September is kind of when that happens. You're going to get highs about 31 Celsius, lows about 4 Celsius. So temperatures are going to be in between there. You're going to want, nights are going to tend to be a little cooler. So people are going to want to bring layers if they go. Daytimes can be warm, so bring various clothing. There's hiking, camping, you can bicycle, you can canoe and kayak through the river, fishing. During the summer months, there are going to be ranger programs people can go on. And then, like, again, they can access the historical site of Theodore Roosevelt's old cabin. And there's a lot of wildlife, a lot of driving, and you do see a lot of wildlife in this park. I've seen more wildlife in this park than I've seen in any of the other parks I've ever been to. In winter, activities are going to go down just a little bit. It does get cold, down to -17 Celsius. You can do cross-country skiing, snowshoeing there, just like with Voyagers, and you can do the scenic roads if they're not icy. That's one thing that's bad about going to this park in winter, is that sometimes the roads will close if they get too icy. So visitors will want to bear that in mind. Usually summer and fall is going to be a little bit better time to visit. There's also going to be, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of animals within the park that you can see as a kind of a wide variety. So you've got bighorn sheep, there's badgers, there's bison. If you go in the spring, like April, May, there's going to be baby bison. Prairie dogs, coyotes, and then down the corner they actually have wild horses, which is really cool. This is a park that does have wild horses, so sometimes you'll see herds of them. Side note, to do the scenic drives in the park, both the north unit and the south unit have them. The south unit is where the horses and a lot more animals seem to be. Have visitors do the drive at twilight, so around right before the sun sets, as it's starting to get dark. If you go around the park at that time, you're going to see a lot more animals. I remember we saw badgers, we saw bison, we saw the horses were up right by the road right next to us. So just a tip if people visited to go driving around kind of right before the sunset area, and they'll see a lot more animals. There's also beautiful sunsets because sometimes if you're high up on the bluff, you will be able to see kind of all around you, and the sunsets are pretty spectacular. It also has a really nice night sky. It's dark out there, so it's a really good place to view the stars. And again, all the information for this park can be found at their website, which is listed on the bottom. And then next, we're going to go a little bit south to Badlands National Park, which is also a very stunning place. Badlands was set aside to preserve a lot of the unique structures, rock structures that they have. They have a lot of different kind of formations, and it was put aside because a lot of these formations aren't seen anywhere else. And it's a very beautiful park. It kind of looks very kind of gray and dusty at first, but the rocks actually do kind of change color. This one is located in South Dakota, so we're getting a little bit further south. So they're obviously right under North Dakota. So South Dakota is right there. It's still a little bit further north, but we're heading back down into towards the Midwest from here. If you go on the next slide, so Badlands is going to be on the far left-hand side of South Dakota. The Denver International Airport is the closest international airport to this park, but it's still about a 6-hour drive, so it's a little bit of a drive. There is Rapid City Regional Airport, which is also about a 1-hour drive. So if you want to, visitors want to book an additional flight, then Rapid City will be a little bit closer, and both those airports will have rental cars available. So just some of the basics, like the other one is $30 a car for 7 days. Grounds are open all year, every day. There's 2 units. There's a south unit, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, and then there's a northern unit. There's 2 visitor centers and 2 campgrounds. And I just want to point on the side right here at the pictures of the rocks. That's one thing that makes Badlands spectacular, is that there's so many colors in it. So here you're going to see purples and reds. When the sun sets, they get kind of a blue color. There's another section of the park called Toadstool, and they're kind of yellow and pink. So it's not just gray, there's just a lot of different colors, and this is kind of why it was set aside, because these formations are not only different in shape but also beautiful in color. But anyway, so for some more basic information, you can, there are cabins there. If you don't want to camp, you can do that. There are 8 trails. Some are really easy and boardwalk. There are some that are really difficult and require a lot of climbing. Interior and Rapid City are the nearest towns. Rapid City is about an hour, Interior is about 10 minutes. If visitors go to Interior, I'm going to just tell them that they should buy stuff before they get to the park. Interior is very small and there's really nothing there. So just bear in mind there is a town there, but there's I think 1 store there. So just people need to come prepared to that park because it's pretty secluded. So here's a map of it. So you've got the north and south unit. The south unit is on the Indian reservation, and there's basically essentially a road. It's a beautiful part of the park, but there is a road and you can stop at various overlooks. It does have some beautiful scenery. During the summer, there's a small visitor center called the White River Visitor Center, and that's open various hours during the summer, so you can stop there. But basically the south unit is drive through. You can hike Badlands. You can hike pretty much anywhere you want. It's called I forget what it's called, but like a free roaming park. So really you have the right to hike wherever you want in the park. The south unit used to be a former bombing range. They practice bombing there. So they do recommend, if you do get out of the road and go off the trail, that you watch out for things laying there, and if you see something, don't touch it. But most of the time people will just kind of drive through that unit of the park and go towards the north unit. If you do go down to the southern unit, just make sure you have a lot of petrol in your car. There's, I think, 1 gas station in between the 2 units, and it's a long distance, so just make sure your tank is full. But south unit driving, then up in north unit is where you're going to get more of the hikes and the trails. And why go? So besides the beautiful rocks, there's a lot of hiking. So people who are really active and like to get out and see things, there's just a lot to do. There's animals, and then, like I said, the formations are just very interesting, and they all change. They're not the same throughout the park. So spring and summer, it's kind of May through September. It can get up to 33 Celsius and down to 7. I was there in September, so I would and this is what I got down to that night. We camped. It was about 4, got down to about 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. That next day it was 32 degrees Celsius. So it went from really cold to really hot. So if people go, no matter what time of year, they should bring a lot of different clothes. So warm clothes for the heat, because like I said, that next day was really hot, but that night was really cold. So always bring lots of things to layer on if you go. There's a lot of hiking, camping. You can bicycle, scenic drives. People who don't want to get out their car and just want to drive, they can do that. There are ranger programs. This picture on the left is actually one of their harder trails. It's called the Notch Trail, and you actually have to climb up this ladder to get to the trail. It's a beautiful trail. It takes you kind of through kind of the canyons with like the rock formations and everything, but it is one of the harder trails. But there's a little, like I said, there's options for everybody. There's boardwalk trails too if people just want easy things to hike on. Winter, you can do hiking and snowshoeing. There's not going to be quite as much activity in the park, but it's about 16 degrees is going to be around the high. At the highest point, down to about -11 Celsius. But it's beautiful in the winter as well. You're going to get that snow on all those formations. But again, you'll want to check ahead of time as to road conditions, because if it gets too bad, they will close the scenic drive. So you'll want to check the website for that. There are also beautiful, forgot there are animals. There are a lot of animals there as well. You're going to have pronghorn deer, you're going to have bison, bighorn sheep. That's a baby bighorn sheep down there. They have the black-footed ferret, which is the most endangered animal in North America, but that exists there. Foxes. They do also have rattlesnakes. There's not a lot of dangerous animals in Badlands, but rattlesnakes is something that you will see signs to warn you of. I never saw any while I was there, but they are there, so people will just have to be mindful where they step. And there's also beautiful sunsets. Again, if you go and you're driving on the scenic loops, the sunset watching that come down over the formations is absolutely stunning. So people who go there will definitely want to stay there for sunset. And they also do have a beautiful night sky for stargazing as well. It's very dark out there. It's very remote, so it's another beautiful place. And again, you can go to the website for any detailed information and find out exact hours of programming and things. Also, if people do go to Badlands, there's a bunch of other units nearby and very close by. So if people do meander out that way, it's definitely worth checking some of these other sites out. One is Minuteman Missile National Historic Site. It's only about 10 minutes from Badlands. It looks really boring in these pictures, but that picture on the left with the building is actually a bunker that they give ranger tours of. So you go in, you take this elevator, and you go down, and it's a control station. So during the the Cold War. During the Cold War, this is where some of the missiles were located. They were dotted throughout the United States, and this was one location. And down in this bunker is basically a whole living area for the two or three people who live down there, and they are essentially there waiting to hit a button if the president were to say launch a missile. But you get to go down into their old living space, down to the little control room, and get a tour of that. The Rangers will also take you out to where the missile silos were. Also, it's definitely, if you like history, it's a really, really cool site. And even if you don't like history, it's still a pretty cool site. So that one's very nearby. Wind Cave National Park is about an hour and a half from Badlands. They've got beautiful scenery on the outside, lots of trails, hikes, animals. You're going to see bison there, deer, that type of thing. So they've got some neat stuff, but they're also known for the cave, which is known for its boxwork formation. So if you see kind of the little patterns on there, that's what that cave is known for. And there's also Jewel Cave. which is about 2 hours from Badlands. It's not that far from Moon Cave, and it's known for its crystal structures. So that's also close by too. So we've got those 2 caves. And one I did not put on here is Mount Rushmore. You might know of it. It's that one with the carvings of all the presidents' heads. That's actually about an hour and a half from Badlands. I didn't have that on here, but that one is also very close as well. So the final park I'm going to talk about is a little bit different than the other ones. It's called Homestead National Historical Park. So this is going to be, this place is full of history. So back in 1862, the United States passed the Homestead Act, which essentially gave people the chance to claim a homestead for free. So this was their way. They wanted to push people out west to settle. What was unique about this act is that this act would let anybody get the land. So whether you were an immigrant, whether you were a former slave, whether you were a woman, it didn't matter. There was no, you had to be a certain person. Anybody could get it. Anybody could get this free land. So it gave people the chance who normally did not have an opportunity for their own land or building their own house. It gave them the chance to do that. So this park tells those stories, and it tells them very well. It takes a lot of, there's a lot of oral histories you can hear, stories you can read about these people who came out to there to settle. And the reason this place was put aside was because this is where supposedly the first homestead was claimed. So after they passed that act, Daniel Freeman was his name, was supposedly put the first homestead or claimed the first tract of land in this space. And they are located in Nebraska, which is the central part of the United States. This is a state I'm actually from. This is where my family lives. We're about 3 hours north of there, but this is my home state. But it's going to be kind of down in the bottom portion, the southern portion of Nebraska. The closest airport, international airport, is going to be the Kansas City International Airport, but that's still about a 3-hour drive from there. Lincoln Airport, which is the state capital, is about an hour drive, but it's far down in the southern part of the state. It is free, and the buildings are open all year round. They've got a visitor center, an education center, and there's some historic buildings. They have prairie trails you can go through. They're all going to be easy. Some are going to be long, some are going to be short, but you can go meander through the prairie. There is no camping and lodging in the park itself, but there are some hotels in the nearby town of Beatrice. And here's this, there's a map of it. It's a smaller unit, but you'll see there's Heritage Center, there's Education Center, there's an old one-room schoolhouse, and then they have an old cabin there as well, in addition to the prairie. And why go? So one thing they have is a fabulous visitor center. Their visitor center has won some national awards. Just because it's so good at telling the stories of people and things. It is really good. It's very interactive. They also have an education center, which is very interactive as well. And there's programs and events and historical demonstrations that go on. And so it's a beautiful building. You can spend a lot of time there. You could spend a good 2 to 3 hours. And so even if it's cold outside, it's a good place to go to learn the history of the Great Plains. And then there's also, there are ranger programs that will take you around. There's a one-room schoolhouse you can go in. There's an old cabin you can also visit. So there's just a lot of historical structures there in addition to the visitor center, and they tend to have a lot of events too that explain the history of the area. And there is also the prairie, and so this is a good chance to see the prairie. There's not a lot of natural prairie left in the United States, but here's some of it. And prairie is actually very beautiful. During spring, summer, it's green with a lot of flowers. Fall and winter, the grass has changed and become red, purple, blue, and in the winter, there's going to be beautiful ice formation. So this is a really neat chance to kind of see this kind of environment that there's not a lot left of. And there are sunsets also at Homestead. So, and they also have a night sky program as well. And so they do astronomy programs there. They are kind of out a little ways. So, and their information is down at the bottom. And that's what I have. And I am going to turn it over to Stacy.
Okay, thank you, Bryony. I'm going to be covering parks in the Midwest, so we're actually traveling a little bit south of where Bryony was referencing. And just to introduce myself, my name is Stacy Humphreys. I am the Chief of Interpretation and Resource Management at the Abraham Lincoln Birthplace National Historical Park, and that is located in Hodgenville, Kentucky. And that's actually one of the parks I'm going to be talking about today. Chief of Interpretation basically does all the visitor services. So whenever you come to a national park and you see rangers giving programs or talking to visitors, helping them set up their visit and reviewing maps and leading programs and discussions. Basically, that's the division that I'm over at my park. So it's visitor services, and we'll come and talk to you whenever you come and see us. So I've set up kind of a trip in case you wanted to come and see an itinerary of the parks that I'm going to be discussing. So I have an idea of where you might want to fly into to visit the lower Midwest. The area that I'm talking about would be Cincinnati, Ohio. They have a rather large international airport located there. And if you have a little bit of extra time in Cincinnati, you might want to check out their art museum, which is the columned building. The column building on the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. That is a pretty well-known, world-renowned museum, and they get a lot of traveling exhibits. So if you have some extra time in Cincinnati before you set off, you might want to take a look at their art museum, which is fabulous and very well done. So from Cincinnati, you would drive south into Kentucky into Hodgenville, which is my park where we're located, the Abraham Lincoln Birthplace National Historical Park. And the building that you see in the photo on the left, that is our memorial building. It is the first national monument dedicated in the United States to the memory of Abraham Lincoln, who was our 16th president. He was president during our American Civil War. And this structure started in 1909 and was completed in 1911. And some of you may be familiar with the famous, its cousin, kind of the cousins lives in Washington, D.C., the Lincoln Memorial, but the Lincoln Memorial is actually 11 years younger. So, it was built later on, I should say. Ours is younger. It is the first national monument. When you come inside our visitor center, you'll see the Lincoln family greeting you. There's a statue that's in the lobby of our visitor center. It's the bottom right photo. And I always challenge visitors and say, pick out Abraham Lincoln in this statue. And a lot of people kind of gravitate toward the older man because that's how most people imagine Abraham Lincoln. He's actually the baby being held in the arms of his mother. So we get to tell a very unique and interesting story at my park. We get to talk about the birth of Abraham Lincoln and the first 7 years of his life, which were very formative years for him. On the next slide, you will see inside the Parks Memorial Building, the photo on the left, you will see the symbolic birth cabin. We call it a symbol because it's not the original Lincoln family cabin that they actually used and lived in while they were living at the Sinking Spring Farm where Lincoln was born. But it is still historic. And I always like to remind our visitors, it's still that symbol of the very humble beginnings that Abraham Lincoln came from and a symbol of how he was born. One of the themes we use at my park is from log walls to marble halls, talking about that lifespan of him going from these very humble beginnings, born in a log cabin, to ascend to the highest office of the land as president and living in the White House. So it's a very wonderful, cool story that we get to tell. If you take a look at the bottom photo on the right, that is the Sinking Spring. This is the namesake of the farm of where Abraham Lincoln was born. And the Sinking Spring is known as a karst window. Kentucky has a lot of limestone in the ground. So limestone is very porous and it's good cave making material and rock. So what you're seeing here is actually two levels of a cave. A karst window forms when water comes from the top level and over time forms a hole that then the water then flows down into. So you see the second level or the bottom level of the cave. So this would have been the freshwater supply for for the family. We like to say that Lincoln perhaps took his first drinks of water from this spring. And it's also a cave, so it's a little cooler. So they could have used it perhaps for refrigeration for like their food, or even just to cool off on a hot summer day. It's a very nice place to sit even now. So that is at the birthplace unit. We have a second unit at the park. It's called the Boyhood Home Unit at Knob Creek, which is approximately 10 miles away. And when Abraham Lincoln was 2 years old, due to a land dispute, basically more than one person claiming the Sinking Spring farm, which his father Thomas did buy and pay money for. Unfortunately, due to this land dispute, Thomas decided to move his family to the Knob Creek farm. So when Lincoln was 2, they moved here and they spent the next 5 years at this farm working the farm fields. And you see the cabin in the left photo. That's again a symbolic birth cabin. It's not the original Lincoln family cabin, but it is historic and it does come from the local area. So whenever we are able to staff this unit, we like to open this cabin up and invite our visitors to come inside. It is very sparsely furnished, but it gives you an idea of what a Kentucky frontier living style cabin would have looked like. And then in the bottom right photo, you can see the farm fields that the Lincoln family would have farmed. Lincoln does have distinct memories. In fact, he said, "My first recollection is of the Knob Creek place." So he remembers living here, working the farm fields, farming. He actually attended a school while they lived here. One of his only year-long formal education took place while they were living here at Knob Creek. But again, due to another land dispute when Lincoln was 7 years old of this farm, Thomas then decided to move his family further north into Indiana, which they'll move him up to what is a park now, which I'm going to talk about in a couple minutes here. But at those days, the land was backed by the federal government, the land surveys. So that's why Thomas chose to move his family into Indiana and leave Kentucky. But while you're at Kentucky, before you leave, you would need to drive about an hour south down to Mammoth Cave National Park. It is a national park, excuse me, but it is also a World Heritage Site and an International Biosphere Reserve. And this is a phenomenal park. I do encourage you to take some time to take a look at it. There is lodging inside this park, so you can actually stay inside this park at the hotel if you wish to do so. And there is a fee that is involved with this park. I should mention my park is one of those parks that's free. You don't have to pay anything if you've come to the Abraham Lincoln birthplace. But if you choose to go to Mammoth Cave, I encourage you to take a cave tour. There is a fee involved with that. You actually have to buy a ticket. And if you go on a cave tour, perhaps you could go on what's called the historic tour, which is the photo that you see in the left that is known as the historic entrance of Mammoth Cave. One of the oldest entrances they have used over many, many years. And then the bottom photo on the right gives you a view of what the cave looks like on the inside. Mammoth Cave is very different. A lot of people think when you go into a cave, you see, these stalactites and stalagmites. They're these columns of cave formations. A lot of Mammoth Cave does not have that. Mammoth Cave is known not only for its grandness, its largeness, hence the name Mammoth, but also once you get inside, you're in these very large rooms, and that's let visitors see kind of these large viewing areas inside Mammoth Cave. So this is the historic tour. If you want to see a more traditional looking cave, then I would encourage you to go on what's known as the Frozen Niagara tour, and that's the next picture. And that is where you will see the traditional cave of what everybody thinks of when you think of a cave. This is Frozen Niagara is one of the less strenuous tours. There's a very short set of steps, maybe about 25 steps that you have to take to go down into the cave. And then once you're on this tour, it's pretty well flat and easy walking. We always like to encourage this tour, like if someone had, it's not too good with walking or climbing stairs, this is a good tour for them to go on, and you get to see some of these really cool formations. And the cave is well lit, and you always go with a ranger, so it's not like they're letting you just kind of wander. You do have a guide when you're down there. So that is Mammoth Cave. If we go to the next slide, we'll be driving north again, back through Kentucky, back past the birthplace into Indiana. We're going to be stopping next at the Lincoln Boyhood National Monument. And this is the farm that Thomas Lincoln moved his family to after they left Knob Creek. So the Lincoln story continues here. And Lincoln arrived here when he was 7. And he had some other really interesting experiences here that you can kind of unravel that story when you visit there. But its park it's unique in that it has kind of a working living farm. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see a photo of the cabin that it's again a symbolic cabin or a reproduction cabin here in this case of where the family would have lived. And in the summer months, if you visit, you will see a working farm. The bottom right photo shows you they have employees as well as park volunteers who come and actually dress in period clothing and use farming techniques and demonstrate trades and things that you would have seen in the Indiana frontier. So this gentleman is plowing a field with horses. They also do gardening. They also do trades like blacksmithing, spinning, weaving. So it's a really neat thing to see, and it kind of gives you a glimpse into the past. But they do that only in the summer months because that's when most of the visitation occurs at this park. You can also see this site of where Abraham Lincoln's birth mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, is buried. It's kind of a sad story here, and this is something we know that affected Lincoln for the rest of his life. While they were living here in Indiana, Nancy, his mom, heard of a neighboring family that had gotten sick. So she decided to go to them and help them and try to nurse them and get them better. Unfortunately, what she didn't know was that the family had milk sickness. And milk sickness is it's a disease that happens when cows, which in those days it's the frontier, so there's a frontier, so it's a lot of free grazing. Cows can wander to the edge of the fields and eat a plant called white snake root. And this white snake root actually infects the milk so that when a human consumes that affected milk, it causes them to get very sick and very ill to the point of death. And unfortunately, that's what's happened to Nancy Lincoln. She went over to help this family, had really good intentions. Unbeknownst to her, while she was over there, she consumed some of this tainted milk with the cows had eaten the white snake root, and she gets very sick to the point where she ends up passing away. So she is buried there in Indiana at the farm. We know that this affected Lincoln and his sister Sarah to the point where it got to the point where his father decided to come back to Kentucky to meet with and court and then marry a lady by the name of Sarah Bush Johnson, who was a widow that he had known from his days in Kentucky. And once he marries her, he brings her to Indiana, and that becomes Abraham Lincoln's stepmom. So when he says, "All that I owe to my angel mother," I believe he's talking about both Nancy Hanks, his birth mom, who's buried in Indiana, but also his stepmom, Sarah Bush Johnson, because Sarah Bush Johnson, we know he was very close to. She encouraged his love of education and reading. So it's a really cool story that you can see here at the park. There is no lodging there at the park. You would have to go into a nearby town. One of the nearby towns is Santa Claus, Indiana, and it's really interesting. They have a theme park there dedicated to Christmas. So if you want to go to a theme park, that's a side trip that you might want to check out. But it's a really interesting place to visit. So if we go to our next slide, we're going to be going a little bit further to the west now into Missouri. And we're going to be stopping in St. Louis, of course, at the Gateway Arch. If you stop in St. Louis, this monument dominates the skyline. It is a kind of an engineering marvel. You see kind of in between the legs of the arch, there's a domed building that's known as the Old Courthouse. And this is all part of a national park that is located in downtown St. Louis. I do encourage you to go inside the arch. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit about the engineering wonder that is the Gateway Arch. I did used to work there, so I'm very familiar with this park and with the arch. In the 1960s, when the arch was built, there were no cranes that were tall enough or big enough to build the arch from a crane. So they actually decided to use each leg that they started and build up and use each leg as its own building platform. So they designed what were called creeper derricks. And as you can see in this photo on the left, as they constructed the arch and up, they just moved these creeper derricks up to basically use it as its own building platform. So it's a bit of an engineering wonder what they had to use and do and get very creative on how to create the arch. But if you go there, you will be entering, and the next slide shows the modern entrance that you'll enter through. There is a lot of glass and silver, so it looks kind of very modern, modern age looking. You go through this plaza and enter through the glass doors, and then you will start walking down a ramp and through the museum. And the next slide shows some of the displays that are in the museum. This museum is relatively new. It's only, I would say, probably about 5 to 7 years old, and all the exhibits have been redone. But this just gives you an idea of some of the exhibits you'll see. They talk about the westward expansion movement. So you'll hear stories about Lewis and Clark and what they saw on their expedition in the West. And then stories from Native American peoples, as well as the role that St. Louis played as that gateway to westward expansion. And many travelers going to the West stop through St. Louis. So you'll hear a lot about its really cool history as a town. The next slide will feature if you want to take a trip to the top, and if you go to the Gateway Arch, I do encourage this. This does require a ticket, so you have to pay a small fee for that. But the loading area is in the top left photo of where you get into the arch tram cars. And then the bottom right photo actually shows you the viewing deck at top. It is enclosed, and there are windows on both sides. And as you can see, visitors are taking a peek. It's a wonderful view. It's a view unlike any other that you will see, and it's an absolute must-do if you go to the arch. I did mention the trams. If you ride in the trams, the next slide will show you the trams are a little small and close quarters. These are these small kind of circular drum cars, and there are 5 seats in each one. And I always like to tell people it's a cross between an elevator and a Ferris wheel, because you're traveling up a curved leg. You'll feel the car actually tilt and right itself as you travel up the leg. So it's only a 2-minute trip to the top, but I always tell people if you're a little claustrophobic, you might want to maybe not do this, but if you can take it, I do encourage you, because the view is absolutely spectacular. The next slide will show you also at the grounds of the arch is the old courthouse. And this, one of the claims to fame for the old courthouse is where the Dred Scott case was heard in the early to mid 1850s. Here at this building, but architecturally it's a stunning structure. If you go inside and go into the domed area where the rotunda is and look up, you will see the photo on the right shows you the paintings. The ceiling is lined with frescoes, and they're painted these vibrant colors. So architecturally speaking, it's a stunning building, and I always encourage people just to see it for that alone, but also to go to hear some of the stories of the famous court cases that were heard and tried in this building. It was a working courthouse. It is not a working courthouse right now. If you have a little bit of extra time to spend in St. Louis, I have featured a few other places you might want to check out. As you can imagine, St. Louis being a city, it has a lot of the city amenities that you would come to expect from a large urban area. The photo on the top left, the greenhouse, is actually Ulysses S. Grant's Whitehaven. This is the photo, or excuse me, this is the house that he inherited when he married his wife, Julia Grant. This was her family's home. So he inherited this when he married her, and at her father's passing. You can visit this site. It is also another national park, and you can take a tour, and it's a very interesting tour of the home. There's also an area in St. Louis called Forest Park, and inside Forest Park, which is a large park inside of the city, which is really second only to Central Park in New York City in terms of green space. They've also put a lot of their museums in Forest Park. And places of interest to see. So you can check out the St. Louis Zoo, which is a very well done zoo if you like seeing animals and going through. They have a lot of historic buildings inside the zoo. St. Louis was host of the World Fair in the early 1900s, so they've converted a lot of the old buildings from the World's Fair to be housing for animals now in the zoo. And in the bottom right photo, you'll see a couple of the mummies that they have on display from ancient Egypt in the St. Louis Art Museum. And then the top photo on the right, kind of that domed, funny looking funnel structure, is the planetarium. So if you get a chance and like to see night skies or viewings, they have a wonderful telescope and do a lot of really cool programs. You can check that out. And what's really neat about Forest Park, most of the museums are free. So you don't have to pay an entrance fee. Sometimes they do charge for parking if you park in certain parking lots, depending on how close they are. But most of these admissions are free inside these museums. So if you go to the next slide, our last stop on this itinerary that I've developed will be Hot Springs, Arkansas. So leaving St. Louis and driving to the south for a bit and arriving at Hot Springs. Hot Springs is actually one of the oldest national parks in our country. It's home to what's called Bathhouse Row, where you'll see this is a wonderful example of one of the historic bathhouses. And it's home to natural hot springs, where in the past, people have come and still do to take the waters from the hot springs that occur naturally. If you go to the next slide, you'll see on the top left photo, one of these natural springs that you will see the water is very hot as it comes out of the ground. And then it cools off in these pools. And there's actually several drinking fountains kind of scattered throughout the park that you can actually take a drink of water from. Inside some of the bathhouses, some of them are museums, so you can take a tour. Some of them are actually still working bathhouses. So when I got to visit there, it was really very cool. I got to actually do what they call taking the waters, which means you actually go in and to the bathhouse and sit in a series of pools that are temperature controlled that step down in heat. From when the water comes out of the ground, it's very, very hot. They cool it a little bit. And you start out, if you look in the bottom right photo, you start out in a very warm pool, then you step down to a little bit cooler pool, and then down to another cooler pool. And then the top pool that you see on just the very right of this photo, that's the coolest pool that they have controlled. And it's very, very clear water. It's beautiful, and you can just hang out in there, and it makes you feel really good. They always say, you should, by taking the waters, sit in the pool, but also drink the water. So they have little fountains and little cups that you can actually drink the water while you're sitting in these pools. And it's supposed to be very beneficial to your health. If you go to the next slide, you'll see some of these bathhouses. They're very, very old. They date, many of them, from the last century, the early 1900s, some of them actually late 1800s, but they're beautifully decorated. You can see some of the stained glass windows. One of the ones that's in a ceiling of one of the bathhouses I visited, and then to the right, that's just a little like sitting area. Some of the bathhouses actually have spa treatments available. So if you want to have kind of a relaxing day, you can opt to take one of those spa treatments. They have massages available. So not only is it a park for you to visit, but you actually have some recreational, relaxing opportunities if you just want to kind of hang out for the day. So if you go to the next slide, I have you flying and departing out of Little Rock, Arkansas, which is very nearby Hot Springs. Doesn't take you very long to drive there. If you have some time before your flight departs, you might want to check out the bottom right corner is a photo of the Bill Clinton Presidential Library, and they do have some museum exhibits and displays that you can look at if you have time before your flight. But Little Rock actually is an international airport, so you should be able to fly out of there and get to where you want to go. And if you go to the next slide, we want to say grazie. Thank you very much for joining us. And I want to turn that back over to Donnie.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Bryony. And thank you, everyone, for sticking with us. We've used all of our time and then a little more today, but we thank you for sticking with the presentation. You can see how much there is to share and talk about in the national park system. And that's why we're doing 6 presentations over time about the national park system. And we do have some more that will be scheduled in the future for other parts of the country, including the Northwest, the South, and the Southwest. So I think I don't think we have time for questions now. We've gone over a bit, so I'm going to hand it back to Nicolo to say goodbye. But I want to thank Bryony and Stacy again for their excellent presentations today and the excellent information. And if people have questions for me in my tourism office, I will put my email in the chat box. You can always email me directly. So again, thank you. And Nicolo.
Well, what can I say? I really thanks a lot, Bryony and Stacy, for joining us. They've been really inspiring, and it has been really thrilling to listening their experiences. I think this was really a great presentation, Donnie. I think everybody can't wait to see to be attending the next one, which I suppose is going to be in April. It may be that we're going to be requesting a change of date because it's a little bit close to Easter, so we're going to be arranging that. But again, thanks a lot. I think we really went a little bit long in the presentation, but was really worth. So grazie a tutti per essere stati presenti in questa presentazione. Siamo stati un po' lunghi, ma credo che veramente ne valesse la pena. Thanks a lot, everybody, and see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Hi.